Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Sam and today we're going to be talking about 5 reasons why I don't think you should pick up the Canon EOS R in 2022. Right then, so the first reason why I don't think you should pick up this camera in 2022 is because of the video features in this camera. Now the video features I think are very far behind on the current cameras that are out today. The video features in this camera is it shoots 4K, 1080p at 60 frames per second and it shoots 120 frames per second but in 720p. And 720p, to be honest, I just don't think there's any point in putting 120 frames in this camera. I don't even touch it, to be honest, because 1080p is a good quality, but if anything I watch is in 720p, it's just like, oh my god. That's why I don't like DVDs or anything like that, because they're all like, a lot of them are in 720p. I just don't think it looks good at all, and I don't know how 720p can be classed as high definition, to be honest, still in 2022. So the fact that 120 frames per second, which is what a lot of people want to use today and age, there's a lot of slow motion work going on, but if I want to use 120 frames per second, I'm just going to either wait to go to the R6, R5 or whatever Canon camera in the future, or I'll just shoot it on my GoPro, to be honest. So the fact that I know this was their first mirrorless camera, either don't put 120 frames per second in or just put it in at 1080p, honestly, to be honest. I don't think it would have been that hard. So I think that's one reason why you shouldn't get it, because if you love your slow motion, your super slow motion B-roll, then there's so many different cameras out there that does shoot 120 frames per second. I would like having 120 frames per second, and I do have 120 frames per second. I don't know what I'm going on about, to be honest, but I just don't want to shoot 720p, and I don't think I'll ever shoot to 720p. And so I think that's why I think you should either look at a different camera, upgrade to the R6 or whatever in 2022 instead of buying the EOS R. Right then, so the second reason why I don't think you should pick this camera up in 2022, and it's another reason why on the video features, is that earlier I said it shoots in 4K, it shoots in 30 frames per second, and it shoots in 24 frames per second 4K, which is all good, great. However, it has a 1.8 times crop. Put it this way, if you're shooting on a 50mm lens, it's going to be closer to 100mm than obviously the 50mm because of the 1.8 times crop. It's nearly times 2, so you're times in the focal length by 2 nearly, but obviously by 1.8 to get the actual mil. So it's going to be closer to 100mm than it is to 50mm, and obviously that defeats the purpose of a 50mm lens. Sometimes that's good to get the reach you want, but if it's only on the 4K, it's just really a bummer for me, to be honest, because it doesn't just crop the focal length, it also changes the aperture. So if you've got a 50mm 1.8, when you put on the 4K, it won't be 1.8, it will go up to like 3.6, for example, because you've got to times the f-stop by 1.8. So I just think that's one reason why you shouldn't get it in 2022, because 4K is like the industry standard at this point, and every camera probably shoots 4K without a crop. Having a cropped 4K as well as a 720p 120 fps really does show how far behind this camera is in today's day and age. Right then, so reason number 3 why I don't think you should pick this up in 2022 is because there's no IBIS in this camera at all. So if you don't have an image stabilized lens to go with it, then your footage is going to be really shaky, and it's going to be really hard to actually keep the footage still and really smooth if you're shooting handheld. Putting it on a gimbal or a stabilizer, that's going to really make the footage a lot more smoother and stable. So compared to other cameras again that you can get in 2022, like the R6, the R5, even some of the Sony cameras, they're going to have so many stops of IBIS, so it makes handheld footage way more stable and smooth. And if you do go for this camera in 2022, then you might, I'm not saying you will, because you can still get some nice smooth stable footage with your hand if you really do learn, but you might have to try and maybe invest in a stabilizer or a gimbal just to try and get them silky smooth shots if you're doing like client work or anything like that. When I shoot in handheld, I've really got to make sure I'm holding it really tight and steady, and I'd much rather have IBIS in this camera than obviously not have IBIS. So I think that's the reason why you shouldn't pick this up, because there's a lot of other cameras out there that does do IBIS, and I generally think Canon should have added it in when they first made this camera in 2018, even though it was the first entry in the mirrorless world. Up the price by a couple £100, whatever, yeah, I think it would have been way more worth it, and people wouldn't have mind paying a bit more to get these features in this camera anyway. But that brings me on to reason number 4 why I don't think you should, and that's the frames per second in this camera for the photo mode, not the video mode. The frames per second you can shoot with this camera is 5 frames per second, so obviously you get 5 frames in a second. You can bump that up to 8 frames per second, but you can't have it in tracking priority compared to the other ones at 12 frames per second, even 20 frames per second mechanical, or even higher in the electronic shutter. This is not the best camera if you're a sports or wildlife photographer, because obviously you're not going to get as many frames in a second as you want, which means you're not going to get as many in focus either. So there's only going to be a few frames that you might be able to pick from in a second, and obviously if it's a sports game and there's a player running down the wing or crossing it in, you might miss the player player kicking the ball, so as soon as he makes impact with the ball, this camera might miss it, or if it does hit it, it might not be in focus, and you miss it, obviously you miss it, you can't go back and try and get it. If you are shooting sports in 2022, then I don't think you should pick up this camera, because you're going to want higher than 8 frames per second, especially if you're shooting like a football game. So that's the reason why I don't think you should get it in 2022. The fifth reason why I don't think you should buy it in 2022 is because it only has one card slot. When this camera came out in 2018, they classed this as a professional camera for professionals. Canon did get a lot of backlash about that, because obviously you've got the 120 frames per second in 720p, which is crap quality. You've obviously got the cropped 4K, which no one wants really, and then now you've got one card slot. So if you shoot a whole wedding with this camera, you're in the middle of shooting and the card corrupts. All of that footage that you've took, all the photos and the videos, is completely gone. And with a dual card slot system, which a lot of other cameras have, if one card fails, the second one might not. And obviously if both of them do, then obviously your luck's just gone out the window. But if one card fails, everything also gets put on to the second card slot. So you've got a backup in the camera as well as when you get home to try and back it up on the computer. So no matter what happens, if anything messes up on your computer, your hard drive fails or anything, or if anything fails while you're shooting, none of the footage you're going to get is going to go, because it's going to also transfer onto the second SD card in the camera. But with the EOS R, it's only got one. So if that one fails, bang, that's it. Everything you've taken is gone. And obviously if you've taken something like a wedding, there's no going back. There's no part 2 or anything. You've missed a moment. So when I do shoot a wedding in the future, hopefully anyway, I'll be renting out, let's say, an R6 or an R5 as my second body, or even my first body, and have this as my second body for that double card slot, so I don't make sure anything gets corrupted or anything gets lost along the way. So that's why I don't think you should get it in 2022 if you're a professional as well. Luckily I've been fine so far, nothing's failed, nothing's gone like that, so it's all been good for me. But you never know, that one time might fail, and then obviously everything's lost forever. But anyway, so that was it. That was 5 reasons why I don't think you should pick this camera up in 2022. Go check out my other video that's linked here, that I think 5 reasons why you should get this camera in 2022, because even though the points I've said today are really bummers and not very good, these 5 reasons might actually persuade you to go buy this camera over than these 5 reasons here. So make sure you do go check that out, because you might want to pick it up after them reasons. So if you do, I'll leave the link in the description below anyway. But if you did enjoy, and if it did help you out on deciding whether to get this camera or not, or if you're ever to go for another one, hit that like button and then subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. Comparisons, pros and cons videos, anything like that, tutorials, gear reviews. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss them videos in the future. So I'll say thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video. I'll see you later.